really being able to learn and absorb from many experts, three of them who you'll be hearing from this evening, to talk a little bit more about what's changed in Florida, what needs to change, and from the perspectives of corrections and law enforcement, lawmaking, of course, kind of as that fourth, and courts too. So I will give like a brief introduction away from the bios that hopefully maybe you all had a chance to look at. Senator Pizzo is chair of the Criminal Justice Committee in the Senate, which is a very powerful position to be in, insofar as criminal justice reform policies. If any of you haven't had the chance to watch him chair that committee, feel free to log into the Florida channel and give it a go. I learned something new, and every single time I give it a watch, he always asks really substantive questions, and hopefully some of those will come up this evening. Jessica Uri, no stranger to the league, our public defender in the Second Judicial Circuit. We're so happy to have her, and she is there for anyone that has asked for a public defender, which many folks need all the time, and they're very busy over there, even with the court case backlog, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well. And Jimmy Bayardi, he is with the Police Benevolent Association in Florida. He's the vice president. He is an awesome advocate. He was a corrections officer for 30 years before working specifically for the PBA. He actually just went on the road a few days ago and in the Panhandle to visit correctional facilities. So he's really close to the Georgia-Alabama border. He's going to do his best to try and at least dial in to participate in the panel. But if he cannot, he has done his best to answer questions that we have provided ahead of time. So Tramel, you and I can work together to weave that in. Tramel Gomes will be moderating. Many of you familiar with his work with Florida Public Radio. He's been a longtime friend. I'm so pleased to say I've known him as long as I've known my partner, and just an amazing voice, an amazing face in media in Florida today, and certainly very knowledgeable about criminal justice reform issues. So grateful to have everybody on. I will be monitoring the chat. We'll have a little time for some Q&A a little later, and I'll pull those from the chat and announce them. And for probably the last 30 minutes or so, maybe less, kind of depending. And so with that, I'll kick it over to my good friend, Tramel Gomes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Katie, for inviting me to participate in such a wonderful event. I always love doing anything that involves the League of Women Voters because it's all about informing the community. I rely on your voter guides whenever I'm going to the booth to see what's going on, where the issues are, where do things set up. So it's a really important educational component. So I'm so glad to be here this evening. As we all know, we're in Zoom territory, Zoom land. It's a new way of interacting due to the crisis that we're in, COVID-19. So it's affecting all of us. So as we go forward tonight, just expect things are not perfect technologically. I moderated several Zoom sessions and they're all different. And we have a different format here. So I encourage everyone to participate, bring your thoughtful questions to our distinguished panel as Katie just introduced, and we'll try to keep the conversation going. We're all at home, we're all comfortable, so let's jump right to it. So with that, I would like to start with our panel, and we do have an interesting setup here. Katie, I think you have a guest, so I'll throw it back to you to make a brief introduction to your guest that you have sitting right next to you, and I'll continue on with everyone else.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's
Who
Katie
am I?
again.
What am I doing here?
I a little change of plans. Senator Pizzo and I will be here together, so I'll be monitoring the chat, and he'll be using the same screen and microphone as I am. Last minute change, so excited for it, and hopefully it still goes well. So go right ahead, Senator Pizzo.
I see Miss Linda Davis is like, what's going on here? I'm Jason. I'm in the Florida Senate. I'm delighted to be here and invited to talk and to answer any questions and have a chat. I had contacted Katie because I was excited about doing this at 6, but show you what a small world this is that we're all sort of engaged in. I was like, listen, I'm actually cooking dinner for the Secretary of the Department of Corrections who's coming over to my house at 7. Hint, hint, why don't you come over and we'll do it here? Maybe he walks through the front door and we get to ask more questions and different kinds of questions in any event. So she was local. I'm up in Tallahassee. We read all of our bills and everybody else's bills. So we're a little nerdy when it comes to this stuff. So we didn't go back to sunny Miami. We stayed here in Tallahassee, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And that's so unique. Like, wow, the everything that we're talking about is happening right here. So I'll throw to Jessica Yuri as well. Just a brief introduction, welcome, and let us know what you're currently up to.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Yuri. I am the new public defender here in the Second Judicial Circuit. Our office in our circuit, which is Leon, Gadsden, Wakulla, Franklin, Jefferson, and Liberty County, is responsible for defending anyone who has been arrested and accused of a crime that cannot afford a private lawyer. Every day at first appearance, there are people arrested from the night before, and we're there every day to represent them. We get appointed to their cases if they don't hire a private lawyer, and we handle their case from the beginning, initial arrest, to the final disposition. Our office here is actually unique because we also have our appellate division. So we also represent people who have been convicted on appeal. I just started my term in January, but I was a lifelong public defender. That's what I've done my entire career. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And we do have another panelist that may join us at some point, Mr. James Bayardi. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So the purpose of this hot topic panel discussion is to cover the state of criminal justice reform in Florida from the perspective of 3+1 components of the justice system: law enforcement, courts, and corrections, plus lawmaking. So as we jump into this discussion, I just wanted to start off by asking our panelists, very basic, what comes to mind when you think of criminal justice reform? Like, what do you think of? What's the components of criminal justice reform in your eyes? We'll start off with Senator Pizzo.
So you hear a lot about the system is broken, the system is broken, the system is broken. And you have to ask yourself, when you get intimately familiar, I was a prosecutor for many years before doing this, like chief of staff prosecutor. We handled violent crimes, but you keep hearing the system's broken, the system's broken. You wonder, the system's broken for who? And then you need to ask yourself sometimes, perhaps the system's not broken. It was just designed this way. If it seems to be disproportionately working out for a particular demographic or race or ethnicity or socioeconomic status, it's not necessarily broken. It's working okay. So I think of it in those terms, that there's a lot that has to be repaired and unpackaged and peeled off. Speaking of committee meetings, I had someone challenge us last year because we're pushing for what we believe substantive material changes. And a lobbyist came up and kept pressing and saying that we were being unfair to prior legislators and we were speaking ill of them. And we let it go, but he said it again. And then he said it again. And then it became a lecture. And so I pushed back, and it's a good 45 seconds of pushback that I gave that's worth watching. But it's unpackaging a lot of things that have contributed in a patchwork style, either by lobbyists or interests or what have you, that have created a further divide in delta between haves and have-nots and fair and impartial treatment in the justice system.
Thank you so much for that. And I look forward to seeing, like, the typical fighting there in the process. So Ms. Yuri, what comes to mind when you think of criminal justice reform?
I think first and foremost, it is addressing the mass incarceration issue that we have in this country and going forward to make sure that we look at a different approach to resolving crimes. There's a big push right now for restorative justice, for truly looking into what's causing these issues, how we can address them, addressing trauma that has happened prior to, and truly getting to the root of the issues that we can move together in a healthy and peaceful way. Mass incarceration has destroyed family after family after family, and we are seeing those long-term effects. In my role specifically, I see criminal justice reform to mean that our clients, the people we represent who do not hire a private lawyer, have the exact same level of representation that they would if they could. And that means we have the same resources, we have the same investigation ability, we have the same access to supportive means, inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, other sentencing options besides jail and prison. And ultimately making sure that our clients, public defender clients, which I'm sure everyone knows represents the majority of people that are arrested in our system, get the exact same treatment as those who have private counsel.
Thank you so much for that. And Senator Pizzo, I know he's going to be going in and out with these. So I'll ask you this question. Considering our current climate here in Florida, what's the possibility of seeing meaningful criminal justice reform? Senator Pizzo, did you hear that question?
I did. Oh,
take it away.
I just
don't care. You can mute me, you can unmute me.
Okay.
A quick 30-second story. And I think Jessica would agree with this. We handle all types of bills and legislation, and we pass, this and this idea and this idea. Everything other than criminal justice has to do with money or policy or whatever. Our job and focus and subject matter has to do with liberty, has to do with freedom in your life. So I consider it to be very, very serious, the most critical sort of issue. And I realized, not to call anybody out individually, but I'm serving with a number of people who have no idea what the hell they're talking about when it comes to criminal justice or it comes to punishment and changing legislation. They sort of nod their head and smile, but don't really understand the difference between jail and prison, a misdemeanor and a felony, a minimum mandatory, levels of offenses, not just of degrees of felony, but 1 to 10 on the offense severity chart. And I realized that, we're sort of into the weeds in this, it's inside baseball. So the very first meeting we had, I did a 2-hour presentation on the Florida criminal justice system. We had people walk out of there. I had one aide, legislative aide, who texted me, "What the hell did you do to my senator? You lit a fire under his butt. He's now completely interested in this stuff and wants to talk to you about installing a new trustee program or increasing gain time for prisoners." Someone who you would be second to last on your list if you looked at a roster of the 40 senators. And someone else also on the other side, now completely interested and focused on, it's sometimes people just don't understand it. Things are said in campaigns and platitudes. There's catch-all phrases that are given. And again, it goes back to unpeeling things. So the likelihood is high once you explain to people that 4 black kids on a corner are not necessarily a gang. I mean, that's still the mentality that we suffer from up here, but I think the appetite is actually pretty big, and it's bipartisan. So my roommate is Senator Jeff Brandes up here, who's a Republican, but you'd be hard pressed, and I think Jessica would agree, to find anybody else who's pushing the envelope more on criminal justice reform, especially prison issues, than Senator Brandes.
Is to that point of being roommates with Senator Brandes on these differing policy issues. You have Republicans believing one way, Democrats believing one way. Where do you guys meet? You have the advantage of being roommates. Are those conversations being heard and those sticking points? Are you having breakthrough? And will we see reform from your relationships?
So Senator Brandes is actually much more on board than even some of my own colleagues in the caucus. That I don't think just because, and I've said this for a while, just because you vote yes or vote no the way you're supposed to vote based on what your party is or what the popular idea is not enough. It's a question of who else's vote have you influenced, either on the other side or your own? What have you advocated for? What needle have you moved? How have you enlightened somebody? I get street cred from the Republicans because I was a prosecutor. So my first session, I asked in one of my bills to provide feminine hygiene products, tampons, to female inmates in prisons. And I said, listen, it's part of the social contract. It can't be just about punishment. It has to be about rehabilitation, lowering rates of recidivism, and treating people like human beings, because we expect that they're going to do the same. And that's why they're incarcerated, isn't it? And when you stand there and say, listen, I might have been responsible for some of the people that will now get tampons from this bill of being in prison, it resonates. You know what I mean? It's all too often sometimes you'll expect, if it's an issue about LGBT, if it's the LGBT representative or senator, I'm not saying it's not authentic, but it's almost expected. So when a former prosecutor is talking about how we should be treating, individuals that are incarcerated, it resonates more. It's like more street cred. And that's why we try to get either bipartisan or other people who wouldn't normally be in this space to sometimes present or sponsor or be advocates for these bills.
Thank you so much, Senator. Ms. Yuri, as the newest public defender, is criminal justice reform possible within this political climate? Do you hearken back to your recent win to office as a change that is coming, or where do you see this?
I hope so. And I definitely think this was a time where people were really not even knowing that the public defender was an elected position, or that it carried such, ability to make change in the system by us being the lawyers that are in there every single day, challenging evidence, putting forward sentence mitigation and fighting for our clients. We have the ability in this building to make the criminal justice change that we need it to be. But it's interesting when we talk about politics, because we don't do politics isn't how we function here. We function with state attorneys, prosecutors, and defense lawyers. And that is the constant battle. It's great to see the Honorable Stephen Everett on the call today. He is a felony judge. I appreciate him being here. And that is the battle that His Honor is constantly fighting in the middle of. And so, am I hopeful that there is change coming? Absolutely. But, the issues we are having are the same. The state attorneys see a case, they charge a case, they look at the sentencing score sheet, and they make an offer. And that's one thing that I agree very much with the senator on, is that I think a lot of people think, okay, if someone got arrested, right? An example is we see people all the time, they have a breakup with a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and they're, in the car, and one person's pulling at each other. It's not violent, it's not a big deal, but it's a breakup. You have no criminal history. In that situation, that is a burglary of a conveyance with a person assaulted, and you score prison automatically. Those kinds of situations mean first-time offenders score prison, never being in trouble before. And if your state attorney says, I'm not waiving guidelines, I'm not going to make an offer, then we are stuck. And that's one thing that I have to explain a lot. If we don't work out an agreement with the state, then the laws that have been created put us in a position where we're asking the court to do things that there are limited legal basis to do. And I know I agree that's getting in the weeds a lot, but that's the big picture. I think all of us have this idea of how the system works. If you make a mistake, you can go in there, you've never been in trouble before, it'll work out. And unfortunately, that's not what we see a lot of the time.
Thank you so much. And similar question that I asked to Senator Pizzo, when it comes to relationships and in your role, how much, knowing who's who within the ranks as far as prosecuting a case, or those who have say over a particular case, to have influence on whether a particular fine goes forward or not. How does that play in your role, and what have you seen or in your career and newly in this job?
Sure. And that's the big question. I mean, we're all human. And so we have our relationships with people are going to play a role in everything that we do. But B, as a defense lawyer, I can say there's a lot of prosecutors that I've got along with, and we work out cases, and I feel that we're professional and reasonable. And there's a lot of prosecutors that I haven't gotten along with, just because we see things very differently. And I think they would say the same. There's defense lawyers that I work with great, and defense lawyers that I don't. But the relationships that come into play there very much, can depend on our clients. Do we have community members that are willing to come in and stand next to them? I implore all of you, when I have a client come in with a community member that says, hey, I'll vouch for him, or he's doing this, or I'm willing to take him on to work at my office, those kinds of things, or he's participating in this program, those relationships make significant impact. But it is a constant balance. At the PD's office, we have a constitutional mandate and an ethical obligation to zealously advocate for our clients and to fight, not just because it's this prosecutor, but because we fight for our clients. And when you're balancing that, with the constant, well, I have the state attorney on all of my cases. So, if I blow up one case, will it affect other cases? And we can't function that way, because we have to fight for every single client and make sure that they get the very best representation.
All right, thank you so much. And for those who are just tuning in, my name is Tramel Gomes, and I'm so excited to be here for this hot topic panel discussion to cover the state of criminal justice reform in Florida from perspectives of the 3+1 components of the justice system, law enforcement, courts, and corrections, plus lawmaking. We'll be taking questions. There's going to be a Q&A portion towards the end. If you keep monitoring the chats, if you have questions that pop up, feel free to throw it into the chat, and Katie will be monitoring and making sure that we jump in. So looking on the policing, law enforcement, after the tragic murder of George Floyd, what has changed in Florida and nationwide, but particularly in Florida, as it relates to policing? I'll go back to you, Ms. Erie, and then Senator Pizzo.
I will say again that, you know, since being elected, I've had conversations with our sheriffs, you know, with our police officers, because we get cases after the fact. We get a case after someone has been arrested and has been charged. So I do see a change in how we're approaching cases. I see a change in how we're treating people in custody. I do see some hopeful planning coming forward for opportunities in our jails and prisons to make change. You know, we saw for a long time reductions in arrest and you know, citations and options to do other things. But unfortunately, you know, we're kind of back where we were pre-COVID times as far as, you know, people being arrested and people in custody. So the one big thing that I'm glad we have now is we do have, you know, body worn camera footage. We're able to review that evidence. The one responsibility that I believe we have in protecting our clients is to thoroughly review all of the discovery to make sure that the state is sending over everything, all of the footage, all of the surveillance video. I mean, these are things that, you know, years ago, we never saw. Our clients would tell us, hey, I was roughed up, or hey, they did this thing, and we would never have a way to verify it. And now we do. And my hope is that that will change practices and behaviors in law enforcement going forward.
Senator Pizzo, what has changed since high-profile cases like that? And from reading in the news, it seems to be like on the political end, there was a backlash to the outcries for reform that sort of viewed like anti-police. So from your vantage point, what has changed in Florida nationwide, and what needs to happen?
I'm going to see if Judge Everett can keep a straight face when I say this and not laugh. Nothing. I mean, there's a lot of pleasantries and platitudes that are expressed. People show up to press conferences, they take a knee, they're saying they're on board, and then you have the governor comes out with a proposal to shut everybody up and, you know, hold them without bond until they make first appearance. So everybody posted something on Twitter about George Floyd. What a tragedy it was. Great. So like, where are the Russia bills from a bipartisan fashion coming forward to take a look at that stuff? Now, I was joking with Judge Everett because he's, you know, the judicial canons, I think it's 7. He can't really talk about cases. He can't talk about certain things. So I just want to see if he's got a good poker face. I can take him no problem next time. I'm just telling you right now. But really nothing, you know, leading up to a general election in the cycle that was about, you know, a law and order, and, you know, it was like put out there probably for more of a national issue or forward looking for national. Nothing.
Would it be fair to say that nothing has changed to answer the outcries, but there may have been changes the other way around?
Right. So yeah. So since, you know, May of last year, when May 25th with George Floyd and May 20th when I turned 44, a lot of bad things have happened. The unemployment system has shown itself and reared its ugly head to be completely inefficient. Mask mandates and what's best practices as far as guidelines has been schizophrenic at best from our leaders across all 3 branches of government, national and state. But when I say nothing really has changed, it's in a sense that you wanted people not only to stand together for a photo op, but you wanted people to actually draft something and throw out a proposal, throw out an idea. So I have We got, pastors, prosecutors, police together in Miami-Dade, the state attorney, and said, all right, what are best practices? No more chokeholds, no more knees, safe distances away from one another, de-escalation techniques, things of that nature. Let's see it. And then basically shopping around a law enforcement to say, what can you live with? Now, if I know if somebody comes back to me, a sheriff or union, whatever, comes back and says, absolutely not, well, they didn't really mean any of the stuff that they said they did at the end of May. I come from a little bit of a different perspective. I see Bev Fogarty Pagel's like, what's he talking about? I have to have a very clear conscience and a clear heart when I do these things. If they want to elect somebody else in my place that they think is going to do 100 hours a week like I do and is going to say what's on their mind like I do and is not really afraid to do the right thing, have at it. But too many of the people that I serve with either sell fear or sell a solution that really is just a headline or a solution in search of a problem. So what I feel worst for is not the fact that I'm in the minority party or that we have to battle and fight against a lot of these bad ideas sometimes. I actually feel bad for the majority sometimes when they have to toe a party line and swallow and pretend like they think these are good ideas. When I know one-on-one and in the back, in the back room one-on-one, they think these are horrible ideas. A lot of my colleagues wanted to come back for special session to deal with unemployment, to deal with race issues, to deal with police brutality. A lot of my Republican, colleagues think some of these bills are horrible. They're terrible ideas. Just wish that they had the political will to say it publicly. So sometimes we have to say it for them, or we have to ask the questions that elicit those responses to show how inauthentic. Remember, proposals are made either from parties or platforms or people with other aspirations to go somewhere else. Very, very rarely is the bill sponsor, the person presenting the bill, organically or authentically involved in any of its drafting or creation. Okay? They're just taking something or taking one for the team or volunteering to do it. Now, there's a couple bills coming up, a couple that I've mentioned that you should all watch and see how inauthentic the presentation is. And I wish them the very best of luck. The public defender in Miami said, good luck to the bill sponsor on a couple of the bills that have to be presented in front of me, because I'm going to ask very honest and very straightforward questions. And they're going to give inauthentic answers.
What are those couple of bills?
The ones, the bad ones.
The bad ones.
I haven't really said anything publicly about these. And I think Judge Everett will understand. It's not that I have a preconceived notion. I just have a position and I have training and experience. I'm not going to come out on Twitter or Facebook and say this is horrible or he's bad or she's bad. I'm fair and impartial. And like Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men, I'm just going to ask questions. Some of those questions you can't answer. And if you can't answer and you're standing at a podium with a lot of people watching, you might want to table the bill or agree to remove that part.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Ms. Yeary, there is an ongoing drumbeat calling for meaningful police accountability. The public lacks faith in the internal review processes that continually leaves the public bewildered in the many high-profile cases. Why has it become so difficult to hold law enforcement to the same standard as members of the public when it comes to misconduct?
It's the power of the prosecutor. It is the power of the prosecutor. I think that's one thing that, a lot of times I find myself explaining is, even within our internal review processes, even when we find misconduct, sure, internally there's going to be, sanctions and investigation that happens. But the choice to charge law enforcement or any person in this country is up to the state attorney and is up to the prosecutor. So, I think the big issue is when we don't see charges filed. I think that's the big issue is because the state has chosen not to do it. So that's the concerning part.
What suggestions do you have in reforming that aspect? Is there a way out for that?
That's a tough. We're not able to take away the power of the prosecutor. Not now. Sure, we could draft legislation. They have the discretion to choose when to charge, not to charge. That is one aspect that has been longstanding. Internally, do I think, particularly from a defense attorney standpoint, could we have better access to IA files, create what's called a Brady and a Giglio list when we see officer misconduct, that information on any future arrests should absolutely be disclosed to the defense. When we say Brady, Brady is the continuing obligation of state attorney's offices to turn over favorable evidence or impeachment evidence. So if we have, officers that we know have engaged in misconduct before, that should be disclosed to us. We should be able to have access to that information. So if and when our clients are arrested by that same officer, we can highlight prior issues of misconduct. Prior to being public defender, I was the president of our local chapter of the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and statewide, we've pushed to try and create these registries where we can see, where there's been misconduct, so that we know going forward, whenever our clients have contact with that law enforcement officer, that we can bring it up.
All right, thank you so much. Let's focus in on the courts. We'll come back to policing and law enforcement later on. The Florida court system is asking lawmakers for increased funding to handle workloads associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has resulted in thousands of cases being backlogged, clogging the system. Florida's court system anticipates by June there will be more than 1.1 million more cases pending than there would have been absent the pandemic, according to Michael Tanner, chair of the Florida Bar's COVID-19 Pandemic Recovery Task Force. That's just providing some context there. How can the court case backlog directly related to the pandemic from this past year be addressed legislatively? And what can be done locally, but legislatively, Senator Pizzo.
So there's legislation as it relates to policy. There's also legislation as it is to suggesting and appropriating dollars. Senator Brandis just walked in. A Republican's here, guys.
You can join in.
League of Women Voters. So the question was asked, what can we do legislatively to help out with the 1.1 million court backlog? They're asking for $37.5 million to clear out some of those cases. In Miami-Dade, the 11th Circuit, they're up 54.27%, 91% on domestic violence, 90% on criminal traffic issues. And they've swelled from 27,000 up to 39,000 on just on their felony caseload. They need money to clear those issues, and Senator Brandis can talk about it. But I look at it this way: in civil court alone, if you're in civil circuit and the amount of dispute is over 30,000, if you have 1,000 cases outstanding, that's $30 million in dispute. You have 10,000, it's $300 million in dispute. We have billions sitting in limbo in dispute that we need to process and get through, so that the amount seems rather de minimis. But this guy's handsome and smarter than I am, so he's going to take it.
Let's see. One of the bills I'm proposing is called the Felony Settlement Conference, which is similar to,
Oh no, I hope we did not lose them. At such a pivotal point, as we mentioned. And it's so great to hear from Senator Brandis to have the voice from the other side.
I know. Well, I'll jump in there just to kind of give an update, and his honor is on the call too. I'll say this: our courts had to make an immediate pivot because we are in-person proceedings. Every day we are in a courtroom packed out with 30, 40 lawyers. We are handling cases. Clients are coming up. We're doing that every day as a case management docket. So when that all stopped, court stopped. And a lot of times in case management dockets, we're able to finally talk to the prosecutor, work a case out, and negotiate. The biggest issue that we have is the ability to resolve cases. If we cannot do that, we have a trial. And the only way that trials can happen, at least from our perspective, is in person, to have a meaningful opportunity to cross-examine witnesses, to challenge evidence that's there. And the biggest part of trials is we need jurors. So we have not been able to do that up until recently. His Honor actually had a trial last week. We have been up and running. I had an in-person proceeding today in Liberty County. So we are getting safely back there. But the biggest question is, how do we clear this backlog? We have to have access to resources. And I say backlog, and I want to be very clear on something. I have misdemeanor lawyers right now, one lawyer that has 322 clients. 322 clients. These are not caseloads and clients. These are people who have had their lives put on hold with a criminal charge over their head going on a year now. And in order for us to effectively represent them and to be able to give them the time and attention that their case deserves for their future, for their livelihood, for their family's future. You know, misdemeanor conviction may seem not like a big deal until they apply for a job 2 years down the road, and this misdemeanor case that they pled out quickly is on their record. So we've slowly started to open up again, but the way, you know, we continue to clear cases and to work these cases out is by having more access to resources. Even more so too, again, you know, to try and think outside the box for resolutions. You know, if people have been doing pretrial release, which is a condition of being released from jail, they've been on supervision, they've been doing random urinalysis, they've had to check in monthly, doing all of this, not having been convicted of anything. Why can't we look back and say, okay, that counts for your probation time served, let's move that. The biggest issue too is nonviolent, low-level offenses. Let's move those. Let's resolve those and go forward. So this is an opportunity for creative problem solving within the criminal justice system to try and get us to work these things out. But if we can't, we will be in front of his honor and we will be picking juries and we will be in a courtroom. So that's the next step.
Your Honor, Stephen Everett, feel free to chime in. I don't want to ignore your presence here, but I don't want to also put you on the spot when you weren't expecting to say anything. So just feel free to chime in. I got an update from Katie that they're working on coming back into the room, but you can say hello if you'd like.
Sure. Glad to be with you all. I was expecting to listen in, but in this area, I have a role as well. But unlike Ms. Yuri or the senators, I'm really not involved in the policy making. Once the laws have been passed and they're on the books, I'm more involved with interpreting the law and, of course, being the neutral party that presides over the proceedings. But one thing as it pertains to funding, which I think I am capable of saying, it's not going to be a politician speak or carefully crafted, but resources certainly make a big deal because, you know, since COVID has started, CARES money and different things that have come down federally or even through the state or through the county, that's been the lifeblood of keeping open. Things as simple as having Zoom licenses so we can have the proceedings that we have online, those have come from those different sources of funding. So we're definitely going to need the legislature's help in that regard. Hopefully we're able to see some more additional money.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. And now that Katie is back and Senator Brandes is back, we can pick up where you left off. We were focusing on funding for the court system and dealing with the backlog. So what were you about to say before we technology?
Perfect. So one of the things that what I've proposed this year is that we enter into what they call felony settlement conferences, which are similar to a mediation or an arbitration procedure in the civil side on the felony side. So I think that may help speed up the process if we have either judges or other designated attorneys that were working to try to figure out and reach a compromise on the disposition of these cases. We've seen these happen in other jurisdictions. They've been fairly successful, but it might be a way to help speed the process. Understand 97% of cases never make it to trial. A vast majority are settled outside. Now, that's not a great thing. I'm not sure our founding fathers would be very happy about the fact that 97, we essentially have moved away from a trial system to a plea system. But be that as it may, what we can do to help speed that process along and enter into and get to resolution, to me is a positive step.
So if I want to hear you clearly, like what will happen will funding, the need to, that the court system is asking for this increased funding, do you likely see that will come to fruition?
Yes, there's going to be some increased funding for the courts. There's no doubt about that. The feds are going to send down additional money to the states, part of either the CARES Act or CARES Act 2.0, whatever that is. It's going to be some one-time money, but those should be used to help facilitate the court wherever we can. On the civil side, we can obviously just continue the Zoom meetings and things of that nature, and those have been very successful for the most part. But on the criminal side, when you have a right to a jury trial, it's hard to do those by Zoom. And we haven't, I don't see the state moving towards Zooming jury trials anytime soon. Nor do see, defendants definitely, defendants definitely won't want a Zoom trial. So I think at the end of the day, we've got to do everything we can to bring on senior judges and try to move these things along.
While I have you on criminal justice reform, just in general, and some of the bills that will be coming before you, we talked earlier with Senator Pizzo about, like, finding ways to compromise, and there are things that you may support that, like, tough politically to get the buy-in from the rest of your party. From your vantage point, what are some things that will lead to meaningful reform coming out of this legislative session?
So if you think about, the low-hanging fruit on the criminal justice reform tree, that would be conditional medical release and elderly release. Both very easy, fairly easy things to get your arms around. There's not a lot of 75-year-old bank robbers. That crime tends to be a young man's game. And so to the extent that we can move the ball on those two, we would relieve some pressure from the system. If you go up higher up on the tree, we can look at shifting 85 to another number. 85 is just a random number they picked. There's nothing scientific or magical about the 85% law. And in most states, you don't see an 85% law that applies the same standard to violent crimes and nonviolent crimes. Usually you see some differentiation and a lower amount for nonviolent versus violent crimes. Expanding gain time and looking at some other opportunities for gain time, I think, is something meaningful that Florida could do that would radically change the dynamics of the overall prison system and the criminal justice system. Other ideas would be moving felony possession to misdemeanor possession. Have a massive impact. We've already seen the massive impact of moving the felony threshold from $350 to $700, $300 to $750. And I'm starting to hear that more and more from the state's attorneys and the public defenders that I talk to, is how meaningful that move has been. We can look to expand that to 1,000 like many other states. Texas is at 2,500, those radicals. So I think there are things that we can do. We have produced, and I'm happy to share with you all, kind of our top list of ideas. That we produced those back in 2018, where we had a national firm that does this work for the Department of Justice around the country come in and look at the Florida Department of Corrections and frankly our sentencing laws and make those types of recommendations. So, just adjusting the points from 22 to 44 or up would have a massive implication as well, because there's a huge disparity in the state of Florida on points via versus the jurisdiction by which you're sentenced in. Mm-hmm. You're much more likely to go to prison on 44 points in the Panhandle than you are in Miami. And so just trying to say, look, we have this criminal punishment code. It was designed to standardize the sentencing, but what it's led to is vast differences in sentencing. So if you do that, give judges more discretion in mandatory minimums. I mean, Florida has 108 different mandatory minimum sentences. Most of those are related to drug crimes. Give judges discretion.
What do you do with criminal justice reform? We've seen over the summer, people were protesting against, police misconduct, and it appears in Florida there was an opposite reaction to that call for change to the way law enforcement does their job. We had several bills, and from the governor on down, pushing anti-protests bills. What do you do with the messaging there as far as, do you agree? How do you?
Oh, look, I think so.
Asking for.
Yeah. So generally, you haven't seen those bills move in the Senate, and there's a reason. Right? Look, people could file whatever they want, and I'm not going to chase every bill that's been filed, and I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to support or deny every bill that's been filed, because it's not worth our effort to talk about that, most of that, because most of those bills, 90% of the bills in the Senate never see the light of day, and will not become law. And so, if you want to talk about a bill that's before a committee and an amendment that's before a committee that I'm going to have to vote on, I'm going to tell you what I think generally, but I don't talk about bills that aren't going to make a committee agenda.
Good point, and that's highlighting the politics of the process. Certain things are filed for attention, and but those on the ground are wondering if they become law, and there is that fear that it does inflict on those who are not familiar about the politics of what goes on in Tallahassee or Washington, for that matter. But thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to add on just in general on criminal justice reform? I know you'll be there for dinner.
Look, so I think the big thing right now in the criminal justice system is just how desperate the prison system is for and how understaffed it is. We have plenty of beds. We could add another 30,000 in capacity as far as inmate capacity. What we don't have is corrections officers to watch them. We are at about 60% of our facilities are at emergency staffing right now, which means that they're between 20 and 40% understaffed. We're racking up massive amounts of overtime. And it's largely because people don't want to work in prisons. It's not a great job. It's 85% of our facilities are unair conditioned. They're largely on 12-hour shifts, and they're getting often held over for 16 hours for hours, so they can work 4 hours after their 12-hour shift. So at 16 hours, they have to go home, but then to turn around and do another 12 to 16 hour shift. It's exhausting. It's exhausting mentally, and it's exhausting physically. And so what we find is 40% of our corrections officers will not be with us from 1 year from their hire date. And if you go 2 years out, it's almost 60%. And so what you have is a young, understaffed facilities, and that leads to all kinds of problems. And that's what our Department of Corrections Secretary is dealing with on a day-to-day basis, is struggling with an understaffing, not being able to recruit quality or talented staff. And frankly, that the sheriffs are largely poaching the good staff that we do have to come get a $10,000 or $15,000 a year pay raise to go work for the sheriff's department versus the Department of Corrections. So, you know, we have that problem. We have the problem that there's a ton of inmate idleness right now. And this has been a decades-long problem. This is not a new problem. But most of the prisons that I walk will have 1,500 inmates and 0 or 1 or 2 teachers. And so there's there's a huge gap in inmate idleness. There's no coaches, no wellness coordinators on site, although we're trying to bring them on to do organized activities and things of that nature. People need something to do. You know, the idle hands of the devil's playground, that plays off in prisons just as well as it does in my kids' lives. So we've got to keep people busy, active, and engaged, or because what we really have right now is a Department of Warehousing and not really a Department of Corrections.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Jeff Brandes. Ms. Geary, we're on corrections and the problems there within our corrections system. What solutions do you think should be put forward to solve this crisis?
So, I mean, my suggestion is always going to be sentencing alternatives. It's going to be, you know, to encourage our probation, our supervision options that are not incarceration, so that, you know, people are given an opportunity to succeed outside of custody. The big issue I wanted to address too, and I ran, you know, our numbers here locally, there's the Department of Corrections, which is where people are sent after they've been sentenced. So arguably they've had their day in court, they've had an opportunity to either resolve their case with a plea or take their case to trial. But county jails are where our clients sit waiting trial. And that's the bigger concern right now, because we are looking at people that are being held having not been convicted of a crime. Some people are in on what's called a violation of a probation, or VOPs, where they're not legally entitled to bond. But a lot of times we have people sitting in on bonds they cannot afford, or on small technical violations where they haven't been given an opportunity for release. When COVID first started, there was kind of an agreement and an understanding that we were going to try and work cases out and reduce jail population. In June, here in Leon County, in June of last year, we were about 843 people in custody. And I don't take that number lightly. It's 843 people in Leon County sitting in jail waiting for their case resolution. Now, here we are the week of February 24th, and it's 1,065. So we are right back up to pre-COVID times, to, you know, business as always in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of, you know, a push for criminal justice reform. So how we change that is to not incarcerate as many people.
what can we do, or what can be done to change that, to get these alternatives to look differently, instead of housing and keeping someone without a timeline in jail, where it's more dangerous due to COVID? What's being done, and what's stopping the decision makers from doing things differently?
Well, I will give a plug right now to two groups. So first is the LGBTQ Freedom Fund. They are a group where if you contribute to their fund, they work to bond out people sitting in jail. So they essentially pay the bonds of people that cannot afford it. The same one here is the Tallahassee Bail Coalition. And in full candor, the Tallahassee Bail Coalition has gotten a lot of our clients out during this time. They take contributions and donations to post bonds for people that cannot afford. And they've been an incredible resource. In the alternative, you know, as citizens, the push is to, you know, take your jury duty seriously, understand that that is a huge role in our system, and that, you know, the language is that the state has to meet their burden of proof in those cases. Additionally, you know, to really invest in alternatives, you know, looking at our restorative justice practices, looking at re-entry, you know, organizations and groups that you can align yourself with that take a chance on people that may have misstepped, and then advocating for those resolutions to our prosecutors, and making sure that state attorneys know there are alternatives out there, and we, the citizens, want you to use these alternatives. You know, we've gotten away from locking people up that we're scared of, and now we're just locking people up because they score it, or because we're mad at them, or because it's, you know, that's what you score out to, and here you go. We have to look at this differently, and on our end, we will continue to put forward mitigation. We will continue to put forward alternative means, you know, and hope that that's recognized.
We'll be opening it up shortly at around 7 o'clock to questions from the audience. I don't know if the senators are listening in, but I was just wondering, just looking at the
Yes, we are.
Welcome back. I'm jealous of that dinner you guys are cooking up. In the prison system, those who are in jails, they are vulnerable to COVID-19. And just in my coverage alone, seeing how they're basically sitting ducks, and oftentimes the infection is coming in from prison guards, and spreading that population where they really can't go anywhere, and it spreads rapidly. We've seen several, heard of several deaths throughout the system, and what's being done there? Are we seeing them being prioritized to vaccinate those people who are incarcerated, or those who are overlooking them and making sure guards, staffers?
So I'm going to answer that by saying to go back and watch some of the presentations that we've done in committee meetings where we've asked these questions, and you see a lot of discomfort in agency people sometimes. The Secretary of Department of Corrections would like to be doing a lot more than he's basically been given the resources and the blessing to do so. We have, I don't mind saying, we have a rather insensitive and tone deaf executive branch.
So, as the Secretary,
I mean, that's it. Sorry. I mean, that's the truth.
I say it.
Our governor has never visited a prison. Our lieutenant governor, not since she's been in office. Our attorney general has never visited a prison. Not once.
So what can be done from your vantage point? What do you try to do to, when you're hearing them overlook this vulnerable population that would, in some instances, studies say
Right.
that would be who you would want to target on the top of, in the priority list as well?
Right. So, you know, there have been many reporters and other people that have asked the same question, and we've advanced this to both to the Secretary, to the Department of Health. I talk to the Surgeon General fairly regularly. They would like to. It's just, you know, where people fall in a priority. I would like to see teachers vaccinated. You know, my mom's 72, she'll be 73 next month. My dad's going to be 80. They would rather teachers get vaccinated before they do. And it's just, there's also high rejection rates as well. But we've impressed upon the fact that if someone's serving a 20-year sentence, where are they going? Right? So if they're getting COVID, if they're getting sick or dying, it's really no mystery where they got it. And so being a captive audience, being helpless and appreciating and understanding people who can't say anything or go anywhere are truly, victims to some extent. They absolutely should be vaccinated if we're saying that the 65 and over population, should be that way. Sometimes we try shame. So realizing that the cabinet hasn't visited, I put up a challenge on Twitter. I challenged every one of the cabinet. I said, pursuant to Florida Statute 944.23, the cabinet, the governor, representatives and senators, state attorneys and public defenders can all go visit a prison at any time of day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. On juvenile justice, you can go from prescribed hours because they put the kids to bed. And it was a challenge. I was like, listen, everybody visit at least 2 facilities this year. That was a challenge that I put out. And I'll say Nikki Freed, the Department of Agriculture, she's like, you know what? I would love to go to a prison. Will you come with me to a couple places? So she was receptive to it.
Yeah. I'd like to, thanks for that response. Just to point out before we open up to questions, in preparing for this wonderful panel, reading some of the articles, and I saw down in Polk County, Sheriff Grady Judd flipped the data around, claiming that the rates of incarceration is actually decreasing, drug crime admissions are decreasing, and claiming the state is doing many right things. So it's just like the opposite lens of looking at who's saying what along the political spectrum there. Ms. Yeary, what are your thoughts on that assessment of showing that things are going right in Florida?
I hope that they are. When I look at the caseloads that my lawyers have and the amount of clients that we have in jail right now, I fear that they're not. And every day that I pull up and talk to a client sitting in a jail pod, asking me when they'll be able to have a trial date, and I cannot tell them, or asking them, why the state won't agree to whatever plea offer we've proposed, and I can't tell them. That part is just as hard as taking the calls from their mothers. So until that point's gone, I think we have a lot of work to do.
All right, well, thank you so much. Just to keep it on schedule, Katie Bonet, where would you like us to go? Would you like me to jump in and tackle those questions, or will you take it and go?
Yeah, so I'll give some of them a stab. I apologize. The leaving was a trip over a cord, so that's what took us some time to get back in. So those of you ahead of our missing time that sent me or put it in the chat, please, or send it to me directly. Go ahead and try and send it to me once more if I didn't already ask. I do think it's worth mentioning before we get to the questions. I know Jimmy couldn't be here. I texted him too, and I likely didn't receive it. So that was a last minute addition for them to visit those facilities. He did answer some of the questions that we sent ahead of time, and some of them we kind of touched on. So I just wanted to get to those. And this is the Police Benevolent Association. And as I mentioned before, Jimmy was a correctional officer for 30 years. We asked about the current status of COVID-19 for incarcerated populations and those working as COs. He said, still very bad. You can't social distance in a correctional institution. Obviously that is true. Officers are working long hours and on their days off, stress level very high for all. I know Senator Brandes addressed that too. What accommodations have been or should be made to ease the stress of this pandemic? Things like early release, phone calls, and counseling. He said he's not aware of anything that the Department of Corrections has done, but he definitely believes in a need for additional counseling services for all parties. What resources can be provided to those working and living behind bars to prevent spread? He said better protective equipment, or PPE, as you all hear it, better cleaning supplies. As a little side note, Reform Alliance did donate 8 million PPE across the nation. We partnered with the Sheriff's Association to do that. $500,000 went just to Florida jails and prisons. And then and this one's from Trammell. The corrections chief is on a legislative tour. He just stopped by, highlighting the overworked staff and turnover, what can be done. Jimmy says the staffing problems have existed long before the pandemic, which I know Secretary Inch has spoken to as well. The FDC and the legislature must increase CO pay, training, and working conditions, another thing that Senator Brandis touched on. And he said, I understand that the Justice Department was told by the inmates at Lowell Correctional Institution, those of you that have been following that story, that the officers are treated bad. He said, well-trained COs and proper staffing means a safer institution for all. And I think all that you've seen on the screen thus far would agree with that. So, and I hope that maybe another time we can do maybe a follow-up where we talk more about reentry and maybe law enforcement more broadly, since we didn't get too much time to touch on that today. But let's go to the chat and
thank you so much for making sure the and comments of the police.
Yes, he sure can make that better than the case better than I can, but wanted to make sure that he had a chance because he did send those this morning in the event that he couldn't make it. Let's see. We talked about some of these already.
Like to hop in, feel free.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
If the corrections chief would like to hop in.
Oh yeah, they just. I'll make the request as soon as they hop back inside. So let's see. This is a good one from Peggy Ramsey. She says that she has a friend in Portland, Oregon that has an apartment in her home, and she's renting it to an ex-felon as part of a program there that guarantees the lease just in case. Is there a similar program in Tallahassee or Florida? If you can, I am unfamiliar with such programs, but maybe Jessica, you might be aware or can speak.
No, I haven't heard of a program like that here. And I think that's a great idea. I'm sure all of you locally have been following, what we're seeing with our homeless population during this time, and knowing that we don't have access, we don't have the resources that we had pre-COVID times. So that would be a great suggestion and a great plan. I will say it because I don't want to be totally, dark, but the community resources and the people that have stepped up to lend a hand to people coming out and returning to society, to give them a second chance, to give them an opportunity to employ them. Those are our good eggs, as my mom says, look for the helpers, and those are our good eggs, because that makes a difference, knowing that someone has an opportunity, somewhere safe to stay, employment, that makes a significant difference. And so an option or a program like that would be something I'd definitely be interested in looking into. The one thing I wanted to say too, our office has an on-staff social work department. So we have an incredible miracle worker who I call Victor Williams, who has the ability to, through his relationships and connections, create social work options for our clients. So we do have that as an opportunity within our sentencing mechanisms and resources for clients. The issue is just, is that part of their plea? Is that something the state will agree to? But in-house, we have our own incredible social work program, and we have social work interns from our local colleges. So ideas like that, and new ideas and ways to support our clients are always welcome.
Thank you so much for that. I can go to the next question that came in from chat. Someone asked about, we didn't talk about private prisons. What were you saying, Katie?
I was saying I could speak to that one a little bit. That was actually the one that I was going to bring up next. As I mentioned before, I would not call myself an expert. I've really been drinking from the fire hose for the past year. But the biggest private prison maker, Geo Group, is based in South Florida, as many of you know. And recently,
thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
President made it so that there was no more federal facilities that will be private. But I will say that there's only a handful right now of correctional institutions statewide that are private. And from what I've heard from both sides of the aisle, just in the time that I've been doing this in Florida, this may not be true everywhere, but a lot of times working and being behind bars, some of those facilities are better than our state run. So again, I know that's not true across the board, just something that I've heard from those that have loved ones that are incarcerated and others that legislators, both R and D, that visit. So that's what I have to say about that. But.
Ms. Geary, what are your thoughts? Is the state being served by private prisons, or the current setup?
And I'd rely on Katie's knowledge there. I'm not totally sure of what the breakdown is.
I think it's 9. Does that sound right? I just heard it a bunch of times, but I think 9 are private.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. If the senators wanted to hop in there, let's go to the next question. What pressure can be put on the governor to ensure that all incarcerated people get vaccinated ASAP? And that is from Anne, Ms. I'm not going to try that last name, but I apologize. I wish I could. Ms. Geary and Katie.
Oh, that's a Katie and the senators question. I'm going to punt that over to them.
There's some other things that have started since we've closed this one. I do know, just for like a little bit of background, just because I follow what's going on in other states because of reform being a national organization, Governor Polis in Colorado put those that are behind bars as tier 1 and got so much pushback, he backed down on that one. There's also, I know, been some polling for those that are currently incarcerated, and there's not a huge desire as much as, because you still have to sign something saying that you are okay getting a vaccination. So I think there needs to be, I 100% agree that there should be some priority there, but I do think there needs to be education about it, because I feel like that, that people have to want it and agree to receive it as well.
All right, thank you so much for that. So, question for Ms. Geary from Steve Urs. Don't prosecuting attorneys have the ethical duty to seek justice?
Yes, they do. They're held to, as lawyers, we're all held to an ethical standard, and we all take an oath to practice professionally and within our ethical bounds, but they are held to a higher standard because they are the ones that are seeking justice, and that is a part of their job. They have that discretion and they have that decision-making ability. And we on the defense side, do everything we can to challenge when we need to challenge it, to come up with realistic options, and to fight like heck in trial, when we're there. But yeah.
And then there was a follow-up. Will the criminal justice reform that is proposed maintain the concept of truth in sentencing?
Ooh. So the truth in sentencing, and what we're looking at there, is to see, are similarly situated, how are people treated in our system? Do we see that socioeconomic background, that race, gender affects your sentencing? And as the senator said too, we know that it does. We see complete sentence disparities statewide. One of the programs that we've looked into is a group called Technologies for Justice that tracks score sheets. And we keep talking about score sheets, but score sheets are literally how all of sentencing in Florida happens. So you're charged with a crime, it gets plugged in, there's a numerical value assigned, your prior criminal history comes in, a numerical value assigned, it shoots out what your reasonable or what your lowest permissible prison sentence is. And that's what guides potential sentencing options. So Technologies for Justice is a program that looks into that data and gives the information to show disparity. So you can see, okay, as a 34-year-old white male charged with grand theft motor vehicle, he's getting X sentence, but a 34-year-old African-American male with no criminal history, grand theft motor vehicle, is getting this sentence. And using that data, I think, will definitely help highlight the truth in sentencing and to be able to show disparity when we see it.
Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to highlight how, this entire evening, how nimble and fun it is to really, and the unique things that gems that came out of this evening so far, to have two senators on opposing sides there on Katie's camera to hop in and participate, and just knowing the story behind the scenes that they're having dinner with the corrections chief, and to have that unique setup happening for this audience here. But going on, there's a question there in the chat. What are some tangible things the League of Women Voters can do to improve the situation in Florida's criminal justice? Who would like to take that? Madam Vice President and Ms. Yuri.
Yeah. I'm going to put the links right now into the two groups that you could contribute to if so inclined.
Yeah.
Tangible that I'll say, here locally, is to stay engaged. When you see cases, when you see issues that you believe there has been an injustice or there has been inequity, to recognize that, to speak out about that, and to know, truly, we all work for you. We are elected positions, and we work for you to ensure that in our role, we're doing the best job. So to make sure that, we're continuing to hold all of our elected officials accountable in their roles. There's going to be some great work coming out in restorative justice over the next couple of months with groups like Community Connection. The Big Bend After Reentry Coalition is another group that is incredible. I see a lot of participants here on this call that are also members of that group. They have incredible resources for reentry and for support. If you get your jury summons in the mail, please come and please take that role seriously. But most importantly, to continue to stay informed. I can promise you that you'll be hearing from our office. You will be hearing from the public defender's office to know when we see injustice, when we see cases that we believe we can make a difference in, and we'll be leaning on our community to support, alternatives. So please continue to stay engaged.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And just in going with that, like for those who are waiting behind bars and waiting for their time in court, what resources are there to follow up on that? Like what words of encouragement to families and friends on the outside? What can be done?
One thing that I am truly grateful to our sheriff's office for is they have created a new tablet system in the jail, and our clients do have access to these new tablets where there is a lot of new programs to avoid that idleness. Please reach out to the sheriff's office if you have an idea, if there's a program that you could put in place, if you are willing to teach, if you are willing to volunteer your time, if you're willing to, simple things like teach yoga. I mean, just other opportunities that you may be willing to do in a jail setting safely, of course, or with folks that need a lending hand. But I am encouraged to see the tablets. I do think it's been something that's been helpful. My hope is that we can continue to get programs funneled into the tablets, online courses, digital academy courses, substance abuse screening, counseling on this digital world. I think that would be incredible. There we go. There's the Big Bend Reentry Org link, which I think is a fantastic organization. I'm glad to see everybody on here. So, continuing to think outside of the box and to offer your services where you can. And to just remember, our country is founded on the presumption of innocence. Our country is founded on a constitutional right to have your day in court. And to please keep that in mind as we navigate through. We are innocent until proven guilty.
Thank you so much for that. And for those, we just have a few more minutes remaining to take your questions. So feel free to drop it in the chat box. This is the Hot Topic panel discussion covering the criminal justice reform in Florida from the perspectives of 3+1 components of the justice system, law enforcement, courts, and corrections, plus lawmaking. So it's been a lively event this evening to have the wonderful panels here of guests here answering our questions. So I really appreciate it. Ms. Yuri, since you're still here with us, what specifics, looking back just a few years to where we are now, what can you highlight as progress on the criminal justice front?
I will echo what both senators said. Changes in our threshold for grand theft, changes in our youthful offender sentencing scheme. Youthful offender direct file process is something where the state attorney's office has the discretion and the ability to charge children as adults in the criminal justice system. There is a youthful offender option for people that were under 21 to have a lesser sentence. Essentially, it would get them out of minimum mandatory sentences or guideline sentences based on their age at the time. And we've had a lot of expansion in the youthful offender arena to give. It used to be that you had to be sentenced before you were 21. That law changed to be that the actual crime itself had to have been committed before you were 21. So that opened up a lot more ability for clients to be sentenced less harshly than the guidelines. We've seen too a reduction in the felony threshold of driving on a suspended license. Unfortunately, driving on a suspended license continues to be prosecuted. Specifically here, it is a significant part of our dockets in county court. So I'm hopeful for continued push there to reduce those sanctions. Operation Greenlight is something I would love to keep spreading the word about. We put it in our chat last week, but Operation Greenlight is a Florida statewide initiative done by the clerk of the courts that works with people to get their driver's license back. And that's going to be happening over the next month in Florida. So I do see progress. And I'll say this, the biggest thing, legislatures and lawmakers and all of that aside, our community in our country is looking at the criminal justice system differently. They are. I have had conversations, with friends and family and just people on the campaign trail who are truly recognizing that we have to change our criminal justice system, that we have to get away from mass incarceration, and asking questions just like everyone here is. How do I help? How do we make change? How do we change what we've been doing for decades past? So, I get this a lot, and people say, Jessica, you're kind of the gloom in the room. And it's because I'm talking to people every day whose lives are dramatically affected. So many times when I'm meeting clients for the first time, it's on the absolute worst day of their life. It is on the absolute worst day of their life. And that's the first time I talk to them. So, until we're not in that situation anymore, until I don't have to hug mothers and children as their loved ones go away, I'm going to be realistic about the status of the system. However, I am hopeful. And I think the continued community knowledge and pressure surrounding the issues that we're seeing every day is going to continue to move us in the right direction.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to keep firing at you with all of these questions. As our panelist that is currently stable, what does the future of law enforcement look like going ahead? Or what would you like it to see?
In my perfect world, I do want a better response in mental health services. And when we're going out to scenes, to have a mental health, a trauma-informed response, a mental health informed response, alternatives to, the physicality, the brutality, what we've seen in cases like that, better opportunities for release on the front end, bond reform and bail reform that is really giving people a meaningful opportunity for release prior to resolution of their case. But I can say, in the policing issues, that's also going to come on our end. That's going to come from making sure that we are challenging the issues as we see them, and making sure that we're reviewing all of the body-worn camera footage, making sure that we are reviewing all of the discovery and seeing any misconduct and issues that we see and challenging that when we do, filing motions to suppress, filing motions to exclude evidence, and having, law enforcement held accountable in those situations. And that's what we have to keep doing on our end.
What are the obstacles? You mentioned being able to review the body-worn camera, but
sure.
We've seen in some instances where that is kept back, and some of the excuses or cited are ongoing investigations or
sure.
other avenues to withhold that information. And in some cases, we've seen that vital information that shows a big story of the case gets released after the fact, a year later, when the public is not really paying attention as much. So what do you do in those instances, or what can be done?
And that's a very complicated legal arena, you know, because law enforcement does have certain protections in certain situations. I am excited to see that we have a citizens review board here. I see members on this call also. So I think we'll hopefully have better access internally from our perspective. If and when we're, you know, representing a client, we have to have the time to be able to review all of that evidence. And as the senator said earlier, when you have a 97% plea rate, when you're looking at, you know, my client's in jail and he can take a plea that's time served, which means he gets out today, even though we know the footage is going to show his innocence, or is going to show that this didn't happen the way they're saying, or is going to show the evidence in a completely different light. And the choice is take this plea and get out, or stay in and fight it. You know, that's where the big rub comes. And so, you know, we have to be able to continue to challenge those things. It's a lot easier to do when our clients are out.
And you mentioned the Citizen Review Board and those who are participating. How much weight or teeth should the Citizen Review Board have, or what are you seeing as how much they will be able to have a real impact in the process?
We haven't seen it yet, but I'm hopeful. You know, I'm hopeful that we're able to sit here and say, you know, independent community members had a chance to review practices, tactics, policy, and have created a different opportunity and a change there. So we haven't seen it yet, you know, but my hope is that we're able to get there. And my hope is too that, you know, from our perspective, we're able to highlight those cases as we see them too, and to put them out to the community, to put them out to our elected officials so that they can see it's not just us saying it. You know, these are the forces against our clients that they deal with every day.
All right, so we're coming down towards the end. Any success stories that comes to mind from the law enforcement standpoint? What's being done good, or in recent memory, that maybe it was today or yesterday that you saw that happen and you're like, we need to see more of that?
Sure. You know, the big push for me personally is this juvenile direct file system, you know, the continued practice of charging children as adults. And what I am seeing more and more and more is our community members and people saying we have to stop doing this. And I think that's a huge step in the right direction. There's a little noodle on the camera right now. You know, just knowing that this is, you know, my boys, I call them my noodles, you know, my boys are 9, 10 and 6. And as they get older and the gap of the kids that I've represented in court gets smaller, you know, it's terrifying. It is terrifying. So what I'm seeing good is finally a conversation about changing the direct file system and continuing to charge children as adults. The big cases over the past, you know, couple years are the Graham and Miller cases. Please look at the Equal Justice Initiative and the work they've done there. Those are the cases that were resentencings. So juveniles that were sentenced to life, their cases were reopened and they have eligibility to not have a life sentence anymore. So that's something good that I see. On the local level, I do see a lot more talk about restorative justice practices, particularly with kids. And I've been involved in a lot of conversations that I think going forward, we will see some real change in, you know, boots on the ground work that we do with our young people.
All right. Well, Miss Jessica Yeary, Public Defender, 2nd Judicial Circuit, thank you so much for participating in this panel. Katie Bonet, thanks for having me serve as moderator. Your Honor, Judge Everett, thank you for chiming in, even though you were just supposed to be in the audience. And
smile, the dimples come out. I'm a little thinner.
Thank you so much for having me, and everyone else for tuning in. I really enjoyed this lively evening over there with Katie, with the senators and everything that's going on. So enjoy.
Thank you, everyone.
Turn it over to Katie.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll follow up for sure. Bye, y'all.
There was an after party.
Bye.